Real people, real radio. Wherever you are, make it TFR. The Truth Frequency Radio.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
You're listening to the Revolutionary Radio Project with your host, Rob Skiba.
All I'm offering is the truth.
Hello and welcome to the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba, and I'm excited this evening to be joined by a return guest who is also a host here on the Truth Frequency Radio Network, Zen Garcia. He's been on the show before, and those of you who are regular listeners to TFR, you may know his channel as Secrets Revealed. That's truthfrequencyradio.com/Secrets Revealed. That's his channel. And since he's been on the broadcast before, there's no need to go through all the introduction and all that stuff. I'll just go ahead and bring him on. Let's get started. Zen, are you there?
I am, brother. And thank you for the invite and the opportunity to speak on what we're going to be talking about this evening.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got a new book out, and it's called The Great Contest 2, Enmity Between the Seedlines. Now, just looking at that title, I'm assuming there's a Great Contest 1 book out there somewhere.
Yeah, I just published that about a month and a half ago. It's called The Great Contest, The War in Heaven, and I'll definitely get you a copy of it too, but it begins the whole premise of the war in heaven and how that led to the enmity between the seedlines, because the war in heaven was the first stage of the battle between the forces of light and darkness, the separation of good and evil. And then when Lucifer and Legion were cast out of the heavens, the 1/3 of the angels of the Most High that joined him, they were banished here to the earth, exiled here. And then when Adam and Eve were created, Lucifer retaliated against Christ, because it was in him being unfolded as the light of the world in Genesis chapter 1, verse 5, right around that area. And when he was revealed as the light of the world, that's when Lucifer, iniquity was found within him. He became jealous and decided he wanted to try to overthrow Christ, exalt himself to being like the Most High, and went to war against the Godhead, and for that was cast out and cast down, and he took his revenge against Adam and Eve and conspired the whole premise of the beguilement of Eve, and that resulted in the enmity between the seedlines, and that's the next phase of the war as it is playing out here on the earth plane for the next 6,000 years, and then the millennial reign.
Okay, so I know you like to read a lot of the extra biblical books, as do I, books like Joshua and Enoch and Jubilees. And if memory serves, it's been a while since I looked at this, but I believe it's in Jubilees, it talked about Adam and Eve, that they were in the garden for about, I want to say 100 years or something like that before they finally decided to have children. Do you recall that?
There's different books, and the premise, and as I present it, when Adam and Eve being in the garden, it's paradise. They weren't actually in flesh form until they ate of the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Right. And then it speaks about how they lost their bright natures. And then at that moment that they touched the tree, that's when their genitalia appeared. And that's when the serpent beguiled Eve because now she was in flesh form, and that's when they were cast out. They were removed from paradise and placed here on the earth where Satan and the fallen angels were already in place and had already kind of seduced to the pre-Adamic people to worship them as the feathered serpent, the dragon-like entities, the fallen angels, because that's what we see reflected in the pagan mythologies, is a worship of these pantheon of reptilian seraphic angels.
Okay, so you just mentioned pre-Adamic people. Explain your take on that.
Genesis 1:26 through 28, that's a different creation from that of Adam. If you look at those verses, it speaks about creating this particular people as couples, both male and female. And it was more than just one couple. So these are the pre-Adamic races being created, and they are told to multiply and to replenish the earth. And they, if you look at this creation, in the Sumerian mythology, this is called the primitive man, and then the second creation is called the civilized man. But this is they were made specifically here on the earth, and they were told to inhabit the earth. Whereas Adam and Eve in Genesis 2:7, they were created and placed in the garden in paradise, and they were not here on the earth until after their fall. And there's a lot of references in the first book of Adam and Eve which speak about that transmutation of their bodies and how they were cast out and they were cast down to where the fallen angels were already. And I explain this in great detail in my book, and I can share with you different passages if you'd like to get a little more clarity on this as well.
Sure. I'm going to kind of go step by step here because
Yes.
I'm just going to say up front that so far I have not been convinced of some of the things that we're going to talk about this evening. But the reason I brought Zen on is because, first of all, I highly respect him as a researcher. I also consider him to be a good friend and a brother. We've had civil disagreements in the past, and we've had plenty of agreements also in the past. And he sent me something on Facebook, I want to say a week or two ago, because he knows that I don't buy into the serpent-seed idea that we're going to talk about this evening. So he sent me some things to consider in a Facebook message. And I got to say, when the things that he sent me, I'm going, okay. This is the first time anybody's ever sent me anything that actually caused me to take a step back and go, I never saw that before. So I'm bringing Zen on to basically try to convince me and perhaps try to convince you of something that he believes. And so as you're talking, Zen, you're making mention of a few things, and I'm kind of taking notes here, just trying to get an idea of exactly where you're coming from. And let me ask you, do you believe in a 6 literal day creation? Do you believe there was a 6 literal day recreation from something previous? Or are you a gap theory guy in long periods of time?
Well, I explained this both in the War in Heaven book and also the Firmament, that if you go to Genesis 1:1, you have the heavens and the earth, the generations of the heavens and the earth being created. And then in Genesis 1:2, that the earth became without form and void. And when you look up the Strong's Concordance for the terms for tohu wavohu, it actually literally breaks down as the earth became a deserted wasteland and an indistinguishable ruin. And also in Isaiah chapter 45 and also in 2nd Esdras, I've got all the passages for this in my books, and I can bring those up as well. But it says that he had created the creation perfect and to be inhabited, but that somehow it became ruined. And then if you go to 2 Peter chapter 3, where it speaks about the earth, that the land that was then, that it had become submerged and destroyed, and then the age that is now was created. That is actually referencing what happened in Genesis 1:2 with the earth becoming without form and void. Because
Well,
in
wait
my
a minute.
opinion,
I thought Peter's talking about the flood of Noah there.
in my opinion, it's not the flood of Noah's day, because if you pull up the verse, and we can actually look at it, but if you pull up the verse, he's talking about the previous age. And the second world age began with modern humanity, with the creation, the fall of Adam and Eve. And so that's the age that he's speaking about. And we can pull it up.
Yeah. What is it? 2 Peter or?
2 Peter chapter 3.
Yeah.
And he says specifically the age that then was. And I've got it right here too. Okay, here it is. He says, for this they willingly are ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. But the heavens and the earth which are now, this is the current age, by the same word are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. We know at the end of days that there will be a new creation, a new heaven, and a new earth, and that this current age will be destroyed by fire. And so the previous age, where again, with the earth becoming without form and void, when you look at all that, it tells you that that was when this destruction occurred that Peter is referencing. And there are other passages which also reference this, in my opinion, in Jeremiah 4, verse 23 through 28. It speaks about a time when there was no man, and yet all the cities of the wilderness were destroyed and all the birds of heaven fled. In Ezekiel 26, it speaks about that there was a previous, like a seafaring people. And in my opinion, that's actually referencing Atlantis as having been destroyed. And then Isaiah 23 also references the same thing. But again, when you look at how the earth was created perfect, and like, I'll read the verse for you. I've got it right here. It says, for thus says the Lord.
What's the reference?
This is Isaiah 45, verse 18.
Oh, 45:18.
Yeah, it says, for thus says the Lord who created the heavens. He is the God who formed the earth and made it. He established it and did not create it a waste place, but formed it to be inhabited. That created a waste place, that's the same word used in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. And so in my opinion, he's actually referencing that particular passage, and he's telling us that the earth, when it became without form and void, that indeed something there did happen. And so I'll read one of the verse from Ezra chapter 2nd Ezra, and it also references the same thing. It says in 2nd Ezra chapter 6, verse 38, and I said, O Lord, thou spakest from the beginning of the creation, even the first day, and saidest thus, let heaven and earth be made, and thy word was a perfect work. And so everything was, he had created the heaven and the earth perfect, but because of the rebellion of the rebel angels and the war in heaven, it became without form and void. And so what we see in Genesis from chapter 1, verse 2 onward is the earth being recreated and reformed in the current earth age, which is, it actually, and I talk about this in that War in Heaven book, The Great Contest, the rebel angels are cited in Enoch, the second Enoch, the book of the secrets of Enoch, as being cast out on the second day, which is interesting because it's also on the second day that the firmament is established and put into place. And I speculate that within that text that the firmament was put into place not only to divide the waters from the waters, but also in reforming and recreating the earth, that it was put into place to keep the fallen angels locked in and imprisoned into this earth age, because at the end of this age, they have judgment. Judgment is coming.
You know, there's a friend of mine. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just thinking out loud here. A friend of mine has been talking to me about the idea that we are we're like in a big courtroom, basically, right now. And people are calling witnesses, and you have Satan, the accuser, the accusatory, the attorney. It's an interesting concept, and so from what I'm hearing, then this is something I've never really had a problem with. The idea that there was something before the 6-day creation, or we might say recreation in this case.
Right.
I've never had a problem with that idea. I don't like the gap theory idea. I don't like when you stretch days into years or eons or millennia or anything like that. I think 6 literal days are 6 literal days. But the idea that, what else? If we go by that idea, 6 literal day creation, then that 6 literal day creation, or perhaps recreation, took place roughly 6,000 years ago.
Yes, exactly.
But God's eternal, so
Yes.
it's sometimes it's easy for us to think eternal future, but we got to remember he was around for eternal past too.
Right.
So the idea that this place could be having multiple makeovers, doesn't bother me at all. I mean, I have no or that he was tinkering around with other ideas and other concepts, before this current rendition. So is that essentially the same idea that you think that, something pre-existed, was messed up, and then there's a recreation event that took 6 literal days, approximately 6,000 years ago?
Yes,
okay.
That's exactly right. Yeah, because again, if you look at the very beginning, Genesis, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void without form and void. When you look up those words, without form and void, formlessness, confusion, unreality, emptiness, wasteland, wilderness, a place of chaos, these are showing that the earth was not a perfect place, was not a perfect creation. And then when you look up the other word, tohu, it says waste, desert, wasted, laid waste, became a destruction, a desolate city. And so in my mind, it is implying that something happened. The word for bohu means an undistinguishable ruin, emptiness. And so when you look at the context of those Hebrew words all together, the passage reads as this: and the earth was without form and void essentially means, and the primeval earth existed, fell out, came to pass, was in a state of formlessness, confusion, unreality, emptiness, like a deserted wasteland, wilderness, a place of chaos, vanity, and like an undistinguishable ruin, void and wasted. When you add in, all the terms in the context of those words, that's essentially what it means. And then when you actually look up the commentaries of the various different, the different individuals that speak about this, it also implies the same thing, that the different commentaries from the different individuals. I can read one really quick. It says, was not, had become with form and void, literally wasteness and emptiness, tohu va bohu. The words are employed in Isaiah 34:11 and Jeremiah 4:23, which is the same verse I had mentioned, where it says that there was not yet man, and yet the cities of the wilderness had been destroyed, to depict the desolation and desertion of a ruined and depopulated land, and by many have pressed into service to support the idea of a preceding cosmos, of which the chaotic condition of our planet was the wreck, on the grounds that the tohu wa bohu implies the ruin of a previous cosmos. That version 2 does not state specifically that God created the earth in this desolate and waste condition, and that death, which is inconceivable, out of the fall, that version 2 presupposes the fall of the angels and adduces in support of his view Job 38:4-7. That's just one of the different commentaries, but there's many of them. All of this is both in my Firmament and my War in Heaven book, but I know we've got a lot to cover. So,
well, man, you've been really busy. I mean, between the Flat Earth book, the Firmament book, the Enoch Gates book, and these two books. Wow, man, you have been a writing maniac, it sounds like.
Yeah, I have been.
Hey, just as on a side note, I was talking with somebody on our virtual house church this past last Friday about the idea of the gates that the sun goes through, the portals, and he was talking about basically a sundial that they were using, and realizing that when you use the sun to try to figure out time and stuff like that, that at different times of the year, it is in effect going through certain phases that we might consider portals. If you're looking, imagine you're standing in the center of Stonehenge or something like Stonehenge, where you've got literal stone portals that you are observing the time through. And at certain times of the year, the sun's going through that portal. That it could be, because I think what you were talking about is sort of almost like metaphysical type, not necessarily visible physical portals that the sun's going through, just course changes that it's doing when it's going about its circuit over the circle.
Right, back and forth between the tropics.
Right. But what he was saying is, or what kind of came up in the course of the conversation was, well, yeah, that could be true, but also, if depending on your vantage point and how you're looking at it, if you imagine yourself in something like a Stonehenge type structure, the sun's literally going through, from your perspective, physical portals in a timekeeping device.
Yeah, absolutely. Since I've become aware of the true nature of how the sun is rotating above the earth and moving back and forth between the tropics, I made a point to go out on the winter solstice and to watch the sunset to see where, because I knew that it was going to be at the furthest point in the southern skies, and that after the solstice, the winter solstice, it would reverse course and begin moving back towards the equator. So now I know where the sun sets at the winter solstice, and I'll watch it for the summer solstice to see how far it moves up in the northern skies. And basically the sun is dancing back and forth between these 2 points in the northern and southern skies.
Yeah, there's another guy, if you haven't seen his work yet, Steve Torrance. Have you seen his work on YouTube?
The name sounds familiar, but I can't remember.
You need to watch his stuff. What he's been doing is taking 3D software, Cinema 4D, I think it's called, and he's basically taking the numbers that you can get from like Stellarium or any kind of timeanddate.com type website where they give you the various locations of sun, moon, and stars, and he's taking their data and plugging it into the software. The software allows you to actually bring in all that data, but putting it on a circular flat Earth model. Cool. And the stuff that he is figuring out and showing is just mind blowing, like the Analimas and stuff like that the planets are doing, and how they are doing, like you said, this sort of this dance. And he said that I interviewed him last week with a few other guys on my show here, and he was talking about how, obviously, if we're in a geocentric flat Earth model with these things dancing over our head, then the planets are way closer and way smaller. Right. What we've been led to believe, specifically the ones that do transits, between us and the sun, like Venus and Mercury. And just the way he described it and the animations that he's got with this high-end software, you two need to connect. Let me put it that way, because I think with the research that you've done already, and the stuff that he's done, there's probably some real good collaboration in the future with you two. I'm thinking that it can help explain a lot of this stuff.
I'll most certainly reach out to him, because another thing that is of great interest to me is the way that Enoch describes the heavens, the dome, the firmament being broke up into 7 circuits, and that these 7 circuits contain the what are called the planets of the universe, which include Mars, Mercury, Venus, Saturn, and Jupiter, and the sun and the moon, and that each one of them holds a different place and a different height according to these particular set circuits. And it also speaks about how Venus has the closest circuit in comparison to that of the sun, which is why we always see it either before or after the sun, because it's essentially moving almost in the same revolution as that of the sun.
Wow, just fascinating stuff. I mean,
It really
if nothing
is.
else, this whole, I call it the biblical Earth cosmology. I like Robbie Davidson too. He talks about, he says, I think it's, how does he say it? Enclosed creation model or something. He's got a phrase, I forget what it is, but whatever. When you start looking at the world around us, the cosmos, if you will, from the view of the ancients, whether you believe in it or not. Okay, I'm just saying this to everybody out there, whether you believe the earth is flat or not. If you start looking at the ancient text, if you look at the canonized text, the biblical text, the extra biblical text, Book of Enoch, stuff like that, with this cosmological worldview in mind, wow, I mean, it just opens up so many things that I never saw before, certainly.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Because we were trying to mold everything that we were reading according to the heliocentric belief that we were then indoctrinated into. And this is where most people still are. And those of us that now know the truth, when we read the scriptures and we see all the things that are connected to this as revelation, it reads completely different.
Right. We'll talk about that when we come back from the break. And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I'm your host, Rob Skiba, and this evening I'm talking with my guest, Zen Garcia, also a host here on TFR. And right before the break, we were talking about the whole fact that if you allow yourself to at least put yourself in the mindset of the authors when you're reading ancient texts, and their mindset was of an enclosed circular world model with the heavenly bodies moving over a geostationary, geocentric flat earth, that the texts literally come alive. You'll see things you've never seen before that have been there all along, but we've basically forced the text into a worldview that none of the authors who wrote the text shared. And we're also discussing some interesting ideas and concepts regarding the creation account, the idea that there was a cosmos before the current one that we're in now that was destroyed and essentially recreated roughly 6,000 years ago in the six-day creation of Genesis. So Zen, getting back to that, do you believe then that this world was inhabited by primarily the angels, and that there was this massive rebellion at that time that led to the destruction of the world? Is that where you're going with it, or do you believe that there was a humanity of some sort here in a similar cosmos that we're in today?
I do believe that the pre-Adamic, the Genesis 1, verse 26 through 28, that pre-Adamite being was here, and that there were multiple couples made male and female. And also that the fallen angels were cast out on the second day, and as it says in chapter 29 and 30 of the second book of Enoch, the book of the secrets of Enoch, and that they had been here and that they were leading astray the pre-Adamic cultures and civilizations, and also that they were introducing technologies and secrets of heaven, and that the fallen angels were the one that were building and constructing the megalithic structures that we see all over the world. And this, a lot of these structures are very ancient, which is why we see some of them at the bottoms of lakes and the bottoms of oceans, and that they could have only been conceived at a time when the water levels were completely different, which shows that they are very ancient structures, and it was not humanity which had created those. And the other thing with regard to the pyramids and the temple complexes and all these cyclopean megalithic sites that we see all over the world, in Isaiah 14 we see that Lucifer specifies that he wants to exalt his throne above the stars and the clouds of God, and to place his basically his seat in the sides of the north upon the mount of the congregation. And so, in my opinion, paradise and the mount of God, the throne room of God, which sits above the vaulted dome, that's where paradise is located. And this is where even the rebel angels were cast out of. And this is also where Adam and Eve were before they fell into flesh form and were banished here to the earth. But that
okay, wait. So, okay, back up. So I'm trying to track with you here.
Yeah, no problem.
So, are you saying you believe that paradise is above the dome, and that's where Adam and Eve were?
Yes. And matter of fact, it specifies that even in 2 Corinthians, Paul, he speaks about paradise being at the third heaven. The third heaven is the height of the heights. That is where the Most High God has the place of the righteous, and the people that are righteous are there with him. And it speaks about this in the vision of Paul, that the city of God, New Jerusalem, is also located in paradise, and that when it comes down out of the heavens in Revelation 19 through 21, it will come down from the very heavenly temple, the throne room of the Most High God, which is, again, above the vaulted dome of the earth. And that this is also where Adam and Eve were before they were cast out here to the earth. And this is also, just to finish the thought, this is also where Satan and the rebel angels were before they were cast down. And the reason we see them building pyramids and all of these pyramidal structures is because they are recreating in counterfeit what they were witness to when they were there in the heavenly kingdom.
Well, on that, along those lines, you're gonna have to convince me more on some of the other things, but I'm definitely in agreement with that. That, in fact, the first person that I read anything regarding that was Patrick Heron. And he wrote a book, The Pyramid, The Apocalypse of the Nephilim and the Pyramid of the Apocalypse, I think was the name of his book. And his take was that that the New Jerusalem is a pyramid structure. I used to be a cube guy, kind of like, Borg on Star Trek, The way it's described in Revelation, certainly at first glance, you automatically assume a cube, but a pyramid works just as well with that description. And he was the first to get me thinking along those lines. Doug Hamp later pushed me over the edge on that, and because he believed it was a pyramid structure too. So I'm in agreement with the idea that some of the pyramids that were created here were probably counterfeits of the New Jerusalem. I'm actually of the opinion that the Great Pyramid, the Great Pyramid of Giza, was created by the sons of Seth, Adam's children. That there was the two monuments that were to be created because Adam had a vision of coming destruction, one by flood and one of water and one by fire, and so they built one out of brick and one I forget what the other one was built out of. Anyway, there's two monuments built, and Isaiah 19 is what led me to believe that the Great Pyramid of Giza was the one that's surviving, and something I read in Josephus also stated that the Great Pyramid was that monument. So I believe that was, if you will, a good one, that the occult, like everything else, usurps and counterfeits and tries to claim as their own, just like the constellation of Orion in the original Gospel in the Stars, as Joseph Seiss and the other one, E.W. Bullinger's Witness of the Stars, talked about that the zodiac or the Mazzaroth of Scripture is like the four Gospels. You have four different houses of constellations of three. So you have the 12 constellations, each telling sort of the same narrative from slightly different perspective. And in that narrative, Orion is the Redeemer, is the good guy. But in the occult, Osiris later usurped it for himself, and the constellation became known for him. And in like manner, the pyramids and stuff like that. So I'm tracking with you on that. The idea that Adam and Eve were above the dome, you're going to have to work a little harder on convincing me of that one. But and maybe that's for another show, because I want to get into the subject of your most recent book here as we move forward. So Okay, so angels this is a prison planet, basically, for the angels. Do you believe the stars are angels?
I do. I do. Because it references that, and also that other heavenly luminaries, like even the sun is said to be lit by 100 angels, and the illumination of 100 angels. But yeah, all the different luminaries are said to be angelic hosts, and then also in Revelation, when they are cast down to the earth, it's my opinion that is at the end of days, that the fallen angels and also the giant, the locust army, that they will all be released to punish those not written into the book of life, which is something that I'm working on in a new book called Paradise, the Sides of the North, and the Mount of the Congregation.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm totally with you on the idea that the stars are angels. The Bible uses the word angel and star interchangeably quite a number of times, and Enoch comes right out and tells you point blank. Something that intrigued me, though, was Jude's use of wandering stars. And because planets they're not in the Bible. We don't have anything in the Bible that says anything about planets. And there is that one reference in, I think it's First Kings, that actually, and I believe it's in the King James, uses the word planets. But if you actually look up the Hebrew word there, it's Mazzaroth.
Right.
It's constellations. So King Jimmy got that one wrong. So planets do not exist in the scripture. And in the book of Jude, it talks about in verse 13, raging waves of the sea foaming out their own shame, wandering stars, to whom is revealed the blackness of darkness forever. And then it goes on and he quotes the book of Enoch. So clearly Jude is familiar with the Enochian text.
Right.
And when he talks about the wandering stars, they're reserved unto judgment. Well, planets being reserved unto judgment, what's that all about? That doesn't make any sense. But angels who left their first estate, who disobeyed the decree not to move, not to change their position, because if there is in fact a text, if you will, in the stars, a gospel in the stars, then God put all the stars in place, and he calls them by name. I posted something on Facebook the other day. It says, when does God name rocks, or balls of fire, inanimate objects? He's naming them. He knows them by name, all trillions of them, because they are entities. They're individuals.
Right.
That were commanded to stay in a formation, if you will, for 6 God days to proclaim a message. But a few of them stepped out of line, and they formed the beginning of what I believe is the Great Deception by doing this little dance around the sun, which brings us the sun god worship, and all of these so-called planets are named after deities that people actually worshipped. And if you read the ancient texts about these characters, I mean, they believe that they actually came here and did stuff.
Right.
So yeah, I don't believe that there are rocks out there, that people can stand on. I think we're talking about disobedient entities.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. The luminaries are these angelic beings, and that's why the Book of Enoch is very clear on that. Which, if you understand that, like the whole thing with the Sisera, and the stars fighting him, that it makes sense that these would be angelic beings as well.
Yeah, Zen's referring to a text that says, "And the stars fought for Sisera, or fought from heaven for Sisera," and you're like, and that was one of those texts when I just was doing a keyword search trying to nail this down. I'm just trying to nail down, okay, really, are stars angels or angel stars? And I'm going, wait a minute, stars are fighting in this battle? What?
Right, exactly, yeah.
And it makes me wonder, because there's some Vedic texts that basically, I mean, the ancient aliens crowd would love to point to and say, see, there are UFOs at war that the ancient Hindus saw. But maybe they're seeing the same thing. I mean, if there was indeed a battle like that taking place during the time of Israel's recording of history, I'd be curious to see if those Vedic texts were written around the same time. It's just thoughts randomly popping into my head right now, but it makes you wonder. Yeah,
absolutely. If that's what they were witness to.
Wow. Okay. So we're in the firmament shows up, and and pretty much everything's enclosed in it. There are a few angels that appear to be outside of it, like the angels standing in the four corners. Enoch actually names them. Revelation talks about the angels that are standing on the four corners of the earth, and Enoch comes right out and just gives you the names. Did you look into that at all?
I did, and I've read the books of Enoch very many times and with great precision, and I'm still learning so much from them. They're just layered with tremendous amount of profound information, and it seems like every time I read them, I learn something deeply revealing. Like the whole thing with when I was talking about the 7 circuits of the vaulted dome and how it mentions the lesser moon on one of those. I can't tell you how many times I read that passage, but it never stood out to me until you and I were speaking about Rahu from the Vedic cosmology, and then also reading Samuel Robothon's where he talks about this object which has to be present in the cosmology, which is casting, since we know it's not the Earth, that there is something casting shadow on the moon during the lunar eclipses, and the lesser moon would fit right in with all that.
Sure would. I remember that show. I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah, while you were talking, I was just looking up because I wrote about this in one of my blogs on testingtheglobe.com, that essentially the idea is that the circle of heaven upon which Yahuwah walks is surrounding the top of the dome. His throne would be toward the north end of the picture that I have depicted there. It would be at the top of it. And the four corners were Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Phanuel.
Oh, very cool.
The book of Enoch actually names those 4 angels standing on the gold-plated floor of heaven. And then in Revelation 7:1, he says, and after these things I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth. So, I mean, the way it's written, like in Revelation here, this to me shows an understanding that these biblical authors clearly had of books like the book of Enoch and of the cosmology that we're discussing here.
Yeah, absolutely. And even Yeshua, he quotes in Matthew 23:20 where he talks about how the angels are not given in marriage. That's when you read the book of Enoch, chapter 15, it specifies, and that's a reference to that chapter because it talks about how they were created as spiritual beings and they were not meant to take wives of the daughters of men, but that they did. They created a race of giants, and so he's referencing the book of Enoch in that specific passage.
Mm-hmm. And that opens the door for probably the rest of the show. This is okay. First of all, let's just address the issue. Can angels copulate with women?
Yes, and especially when they are given bodies of men. Because just recently I did a show with David Carrico where we were talking about the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs. And in that particular book, there's a reference in Reuben's testimony. He speaks about the Watchers, and he specifies that they were given bodies of men. And I actually found 3 other confirming witnesses for this in the Kebra Nagas in chapter 100 of the Fall of the Angels. It talks about that as well, about them being given bodies of men, male bodies, and that's what made them be able to, and it also specifies the daughters of Cain in the copulation. Mm-hmm. But I can bring those verses up at some point as well. But it's absolutely fascinating, and that's the difference. Whereas the rebel angels, when they were cast out, they were interdimensional. They were spiritual beings, and when they want to engage in copulation with human women, they have to take over a host body. They have to possess flesh form in order to achieve that experience. Whereas the Watcher angels, the 200 that came down, they were given bodies of flesh, male bodies of flesh, and that's what made their copulation possible. And so there's a slight difference, but yes, both of them can. And even in the stories of Lot and Abraham, we see how they had physical properties in that they were able to eat and drink and to have dinner with Abraham and Lot. So
yeah, exactly. That was the point that I always bring up, is whenever angels manifest themselves on earth, we see many times, first of all, they're always described as men. They have physical, tangible bodies, and they eat and drink. So I say, well, I mean, if they've got the plumbing for that, it's not a stretch to think, right, that they may have other abilities. But and Paul says that we may entertain angels unaware. That
yes.
That we could, and I'll tell you, I have had a few experiences in my life. I can't verify this or say for absolute certainty, but I can tell you, I believe that on a number of occasions I have in fact entertained angels or unaware, where things have happened where an individual will show up at a certain time, not the same person, but somebody will show up at a certain time when I desperately needed help or encouragement or what have you, and then inexplicably within seconds they're gone. And like, you turn around for a second, you turn back, and wait, where'd they go? So
yes. I think that happens more often than we realize.
Yeah, I mean, the show Touched by an Angel, maybe a little bit cheesy, but I kind of enjoyed the show when it was on, and there were certain aspects of the show that in my own life I certainly could relate to. So I do believe that they do often manifest here, and when they do in a fleshly form. So I mean, if they're shapeshifters or whatever you want to call them, they appear in every way to be human males with the appropriate plumbing.
Yes, I agree.
So with that in mind, I know we're in agreement with Genesis chapter 6 that it's not the allegedly good sons of Seth getting together with the bad sons of Cain, or daughters of Cain. Where Genesis 6 talks about the sons of God in those days, came down into the daughters of men. And there's a whole line of thought out there that says that the sons of God is a reference to the good sons of Seth, and the daughters of men are the bad daughters of Cain, which is just utterly ridiculous. Nobody shared that.
Giants from that. How do you get giants? I mean,
huge giants.
Right.
Yeah, at Kissing Cousins, I don't care how much spinach you're going to feed these people, aren't going to.
Right.
It's not going to happen. And nobody believed that nobody even mentioned that worldview until about 160 AD. Prior to that, everybody had the unanimous view that we're talking about angelic beings coming down. So we're in agreement with that.
Yes.
Now, in my understanding, the first and only time that has ever happened, biblically speaking anyway, was in Genesis 6. Do you believe there was some sort of hanky-panky going on with angelic beings and human women prior to Genesis 6?
Going back to Genesis 3, that, in my opinion, that is where the children of Cain came about. And this all goes back to looking at and understanding what occurred in the garden, which is why we have in Genesis 3, verse 15, the appearance of the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, and that the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent is referencing Cain and Abel, because they were two different children from two different fathers. And if you want to go into some of the Hebrew terminology and explaining the garden parable further, it's my opinion. Now, because I know a lot of people believe that the seed of the serpent shows up in Genesis 6, but again, it's my opinion that it goes all the way back to Genesis 3, to the garden parable. And Yeshua actually references in great detail in Matthew chapter 13, where he speaks about the parable of the sower, the parable of the kingdom, the parable of the tares of the field. He describes the enemy sneaking into the garden and sowing the tares. And then he explains in the parable of the tares of the field that that enemy is the wicked one, which that is the same term used in 1 John chapter 3, where it speaks about Cain being of the wicked one. And if you look up those verses in Bible Hub, there are several passages which translations which say that Cain was the child of the wicked one, and which is the take that I get as well. Because again, when you understand, he says that the enemy is the wicked one, then he clarifies that the wicked one is the devil, and that the tares are the children of the devil. And then he ties together the harvest at the end of days with the same thing in the parable of the kingdom, where it says, from whence did the tares appear? And he says, let both grow together until the time of the end, and then at the time of the end, I'll send out the angels as reapers to gather the tares for burning and the wheat for preservation. And so that, in my opinion, is specifying exactly what Paul speaks about in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 2 and 3, where he speaks about the Eve being beguiled by the serpent and having become losing her virginity as a result of that beguilement, which if you understand that beguilement is what led to her conceiving and bringing forth conceiving Cain, then all of these references make absolute sense. And then again, when you look at the terms in the Hebrew terms for seed, fruit, and even eating the fruit, and that there's part of that definition for eating is to lie with a woman in a pleasurable type of way. And then the Hebrew definitions for seed and for fruit, all of that has to do with children, progeny, descendants. And then the other thing, as far as the names, even the names of the children, when you look up the names for Cain.
Wait, you're going to have to hold that. We're going to go to break here, so we'll save that for when we come right back from the break, the names of the sons of Cain.
All right, cool.
And welcome back to the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba, for the second hour of the broadcast. I'm talking with my guest this evening, Zen Garcia. And right before the break, Zen was on a roll talking about his thesis regarding something that happened possibly between Eve and another entity apart from Adam, which led to the birth of Cain. Now, let me just say, again, this is a subject that I have been quite opposed to, mainly because of the way Genesis 4 is written, and we'll get to that as the broadcast continues, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But I just want to say that one of the reasons why I wanted to bring him on the broadcast this evening was because he had sent me a text message. It was February 21st. He said, "Hey, I just want to share something with you. You had watched one of my videos, and I made a comment on something. You said, you ever consider this?" And you quote from Jubilees chapter 4, talking about Cain and Abel and whatnot. And then you say, notice that in the above verse, Seth is cited as Adam's second son, as Abel was their first. Now, of course, Cain was supposedly their first, if we look at Genesis 4. Also consider that Jude says that Enoch is the seventh from Adam. And that's in Jude chapter, or verse 14. There's no chapters. Jude verse 4. Yeah, chapter 1, I guess. Verse 14. And Enoch also the seventh from Adam. And if you just do a Google search for genealogy of Adam or sons of Adam, you'll see typically Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalaleel, Jared, Enoch. Well, that's only 6. So if you say Abel is first from Adam, then what do you do with Cain? If you say Cain is first from Adam, according to Genesis 4, then Enoch is 8th from Adam, not 7th from Adam. So, you sent me in sort of this brain loop where I'm going, well, wait a minute, wait a minute.
Right.
So, and the gerbil's been running on that wheel pretty much ever since. So that's what got me intrigued. That's why you're on the show tonight. And right before the break, you were starting to go down the path of the meaning of the names of Cain's offspring. And I have become very intrigued with looking into the names and specifically the chronological order in which names are given in the Bible, because not always, but quite often, you find almost like an encoded message there when you look up the meanings of their names. And Chuck Missler, Dr. Missler, was the first person I ever saw bring up the meaning of the names of the patriarchs from Adam to Noah. And it's like, man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down, teaching that with his death, the despairing shall find rest, or something of that nature. And, when I looked it up for myself, looked at the meaning of the names given in the order that they're given, sure enough, I mean, there's the whole plan of God basically laid out for you in the meaning of those good patriarchs, sons of Adam. But then you have this other line over here. So what did you find in the meaning of the names of Cain's offspring?
Okay, I'll go into that, but I want to read really quick the 2 Corinthians 11 to set the premise for this.
Okay.
Paul says, "For I am jealous over you with godly jealousy, for I have espoused you to one husband, that I may present you as a chaste virgin to Christ. But I fear lest by any means, as the serpent beguiled Eve through his subtlety, so your minds should be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ." So when you understand the context of these two verses, he's basically referencing what happened in the garden, and he's saying that because the serpent beguiled Eve, and when you look up that word beguiled, in the Greek it's expatio, and it means wholly seduced. And it connects with her having lost her virginity in the garden due to her being beguiled. Now, so we'll go to the names. When you look up the Hebrew word for Cain, it means possession or acquired. And I take this to mean that Adam, because he was the one, just as he named all the animals, he named the children, he named his wife, he even named her Hava, which means life giver, and said that she was the mother of all living. And the reason he references that, in my opinion, is because she was the mother of both bloodlines, the Canaanites as well as the children of Adam, the seed of the woman. So Cain, his name means possession or acquired. If you marry a woman that had already conceived from another person, you acquire a stepson as a possession. And so it makes sense to me that Cain would have this particular meaning, because that's in fact what he was, is he was a stepson to Adam, and that he was not the real blood, flesh and blood child of Adam's. When you look up the name for Seth, it means replacement, compensation. And this happened because, as it says in that particular passage in Jubilees 4, that Seth was a replacement for Abel because he was killed by his half-brother Cain. And so also, we'll get to Genesis 4:1, but the reason you see Cain's lineage separated from Adam's lineage in Genesis 4 and Adam's lineage in Genesis 5 is because, in fact, they were two different bloodlines, two different genealogies, two different groups of people, which is why we always see in the scriptures, especially in the first, like the second book of Adam and Eve, or the first 10 generations of Adam and Cain, they are told never to intermarry in with the children of Cain. I'll read the passage from the book of Jubilees, chapter 4, verse 7. It says, "And Adam and his wife mourned for Abel 4 weeks of years. And in the 4th year of the 5th week, they became joyful. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bare him a son, and he called his name Seth. For he said, God hath raised up a second seed unto us onto the earth instead of Abel, for Cain slew him." Now, if Cain was Adam and Eve's first son, Seth would be their third son, not their second.
Right. I mean, that's what I'm going, what? Wait a minute. Wow. I mean, and that goes back. I mean, okay, so you're reading from an extra biblical text there, but that is confirmed by the canonized text of Jude.
Right, exactly.
With the statement of 7th from Adam, not 8th.
Right. And also, if you look at Luke chapter 3, where the genealogy of Christ is given. And there's also two other confirming witnesses. The genealogy of Christ is given in the Book of the Bee and also the Cave of Treasures. All three of them do not include Cain in Adam's genealogy or that of the genealogy of Christ. And so the reason being is because Cain was different. His nature was different. He was of his father, the wicked one, and this is why he was also inclined and had the tendency towards evil, which is why he became the first murderer, liar, and deceiver. And who also is referenced as the first murderer, liar, and deceiver in the scriptures? Satan. Because he's also referenced in the same way. Now, if you look at Genesis chapter 5, verse 3 in the King James, it says that, and Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness and after his image, and called his name Seth. So now we're going to actually look at the verses, Genesis chapter 4 and also Genesis chapter 5, because these are very important. Now, in this particular book, the Great Contest, I told you that I share the Genesis narrative from chapter 3 forward from three different parallel accounts: the King James, the Septuagint, and also the Targum translation. Now, I sent you a copy of the Targums, which, if for people that don't know what the Targums are, they are the Aramaic translations of the original Hebrew Torah, and they date back to the diaspora, when the Holy Temple was rebuilt after Darius and Cyrus funded the rebuilding of the Holy Temple, and the people were allowed to leave Babylon in Nebuchadnezzar's day and to return back to the Holy Land. When they did, and they returned and began to start worship there again in the temple, they realized that the people no longer spoke Hebrew, and they kept having to translate the Torah into Aramaic. And so the Targum are the translations which came about from that particular time period. So they date back 2,000 years. And when you read these particular translations, there's increased detail provided within almost every passage, every scripture, and every chapter. And now I'm going to read Genesis 4:1 in the King James. It says, "And Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord." In the Targum translation, it says, "And Adam knew Hava, his wife, who had desired the angel, semicolon, and she conceived and bare Cain. And she said, I have acquired a man, the angel of the Lord. And she added to bear from her husband Adam, his twin, even Abel." And so this particular passage, who had desired the angel, that is referencing, going back to exactly what Paul said in 2 Corinthians, that the serpent beguiling Eve, which again, beguiled means wholly seduced. And even in Genesis, when you look up the Hebrew word for that, it's nakash, nasha, like NASA almost, and it means wholly seduced. And so it's the same thing, that Eve was wholly seduced, and it was her desiring the angel which led to her conception of Cain. Understanding it this way, it makes sense that this passage is located in Genesis 4, verse 1, which is the chapter that has the entire genealogy of the sons of Cain listed. And then we have in Genesis chapter 5 that of the children of Adam. Now, there's a couple of versions which, if you look up in a book called The Traditions of the Jews, and also another book called The Legends of the Jews. The Traditions of the Jews was published in 1909. The Legends of the Jews was published in 1700. And it's a commentary on what Genesis 4:1 is actually referencing. And this is the way that they break down those particular passages. It says this from the Legends of the Jews. And Adam knew his wife, who had conceived by the angel Samael, was pregnant and bare Cain, whose resemblance was like the upper creatures and not like the lower. And she said, I have got the man, the angel of the Lord. Now the name Samael, interestingly enough, in the Targum chapter 3, verse 6, where it speaks about the serpent, in the Targum, it actually calls the serpent Samael, the angel of death. And the next passage from the traditions of the Jews, he interprets Genesis 4:1 in this way. Cain's descent from Satan, who is the angel Samael, was revealed in his seraphic appearance. At his birth, the exclamation was wrung from Eve, I have gotten a man through an angel of the Lord. And so there are other translations that say, sometimes I have gotten a man from or through an angel of the Lord, which would make sense because that's exactly what Samael was. He was an angel of the Lord.
Well, King James, that text is kind of weird.
Yes, it is.
Genesis 4. Let me just get to it real quick. And Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh.
Mm-hmm. Right. And see, these other passages are speaking about the angel of the Lord, which, if you connect it to her having desired the angel, and that Samael, Satan, was an angel of the Lord, then it makes sense why she would say this, because she's actually speaking about that she had required a man through or from an angel of the Lord, and Samael is that angel, which when we get to Genesis 5, and I'll read the Targum version of Genesis 5, it becomes clear that this is exactly what is being referenced. And I'll read this passage. It says this in Genesis 5 in the Targum. I'll skip down to where it says, and Adam lived 130 years. And Adam lived 130 years and begat Sheth, who had the likeness of his image and of his similitude. For before had Hava borne Cain, who was not like to him, and Abel was killed by his hand. And Cain was cast out, neither is his seed genealogized in the book of the genealogy of Adam. But afterwards there was one born like him, and he called his name Sheth, which again, remember, Sheth means replacement or substitute. And again, it makes sense that his name would be replacement or substitute because he replaced Abel, who was Adam and Eve's firstborn son, and who was killed by his half-brother Cain. And so this shows you the distinction. And again, when you understand that it was Eve's desiring the angel that led to her conception of Cain, and that Cain was the firstborn of the serpent, the Nakash, that's why it's located, again, in Genesis, at the beginning of Genesis chapter 4, which is the 10 generations of the Canaanites. And Genesis chapter 5 is the beginning of the seed of Adam. And also in Luke chapter 3, with the lineage of Christ, why Cain is excluded from that lineage.
I'm looking at the various English translations for Genesis 4:1. A lot of them are saying that Eve is saying, I have gotten a man with the help of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. But I mean, so none of the Hebrew Torah text is saying angel of the Lord, but yet you have all these Jewish commentators and extra biblical texts saying that was what was going on there.
Well, the Targum is translated from the Hebrew Torah. It's the Aramaic translation of the Hebrew Torah.
And
So it's
a
not,
commentary, effectively an ancient commentary on the Torah, right?
well, no, it's not. It's not written like a commentary. It has extra commentary in there, but this is what was translated from the Torah, and the portions that, yes, some people would say that it is a commentary, but it's not. It was the Aramaic translation, because you have to remember, just as the Hebrew people were very specific about any translations of the Hebrew Torah into Greek, so were they same with the Aramaic translations of the Targum from the Hebrew Torah. And so they weren't adding to or subtracting. It was very the laws that the scribes had to go through in order to bring forth this. It was an authorized translation, and this is what they used. The actual the Hebrews themselves used 2,000 years ago in the Holy Temple when it was restored and rebuilt. And so when you read from the Targum, even though these are the English translations of the Aramaic, it is still the Aramaic of the actual Hebrew. And so, in my opinion, the extra detail is just showing us really what the real intent and purpose and the meaning behind these verses were. Because again, when you look at the different commentaries, and even in the King James, with what Christ is referencing in Matthew chapter 13, you can see precisely what he is talking about when you understand the interpretation of what happened in Genesis in chapter 3 in the way that I'm bringing forth. Which again, when you study the Hebrew terms, this is also what you'll get from those terms.
Yeah, I mean, I guess historically speaking, those who do not share this seedline view would take scriptures like that, where Yeshua is talking about Cain and of the devil and whatnot, and say, well, that's just figurative. That's like the operative word these days whenever the scripture doesn't agree with whatever your mindset is. It's figurative. And so I guess, I would have to say I would be a hypocrite then if I were to say that now, especially after everything that I've been saying the Bible should be taken literally with regard to cosmology. Then,
Right.
I've got to apply that same mindset here. And, even though this is something I have historically been very much opposed to and have disagreed with, all the English translations we have of Genesis 4:1 don't support that, but yet there are other texts that do. And the Jude one really gets me, that because he would be eighth from Adam,
Right.
if you include Cain as firstborn, and if you exclude Cain, then it just proves your point.
Right,
So-
exactly. Luke too, because it's the same thing that's brought up in Luke chapter 3. Because Cain is excluded from the children of Adam as well as from Christ's genealogy.
Yeah, so I'm not going to say Jude's lying, and I'm going to say Jude's a Holy Spirit inspired author of Scripture, and Jude says that Enoch is seventh from Adam. So this is a ball in your court. I'll give you that. It's definitely a big, and all the other verses that you've been bringing up. You mentioned that you were going to give us the meaning of the names. While you were talking, happened to look them up. I want to see what you came up with, but I looked them up also. So what do you get for the meaning of the names of Cain's offspring? And just for the sake of our listeners who don't know the names, you have Cain, who begat Enoch, who begat Irad, who begat Mahujael, who begat Methusael, who begat Lamech, who begat Jubal, Jabal, Naamah, and Tubal-Cain.
Yeah, what I was referenced to was actually Cain and Seth in speaking about their names. But I don't have the study of which is an interesting study, just like what Chuck Missler did with the names of Adam's children. It's a very interesting study. But if you have that before you, I'm most interested. In listening.
There's a resource that I love to refer people to. It's called A Dictionary of Scripture Proper Names by J.B. Jackson. It's a really short book. And all it is all the names of the people in the Bible and or cities. Any proper name in the Bible is listed here, and the corresponding meaning of the names. And what's fun to do is whenever you see a genealogy listed, is to look at the names that are given, or whether it's a genealogy or just mention of names. Look up the meaning of the names in the same order that the names are given, and write out their meanings. And you'll find, not always, but many, many times, you'll find some very interesting paragraphs emerge. And I've certainly found what Chuck Missler said, and I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, what those names mean. The names of the 12 patriarchs, the sons of Jacob, when you look at their names, it tells a story. And a lot of times the names of the sons of Jacob, the 12 sons, are not always given in their birth order. And so when you read them off in their birth order, it gives a very interesting definition. And when you see other times when they're not in the birth order, obviously the paragraph changes. And it's also interesting when you have the spies going into the land in Numbers 13, crazy stuff. It's all there. So with that as a sort of a preface, here are the meaning of the names of Cain according to this book. Cain's name means fabricator. Enoch's name is dedicated. Arad, a wild ass. Mahujal, blot out that Yah is my God. That's what his name means. Blot out that Yah is my God. Wow. Yeah. And so these are the sons of Cain. That's what he names his kid. I'm going to name my kid blot out that Yah is my God. Methusael, they died inquiring. And Lamech is to bring low or to despair or despairing. So basically, if you string it together in a sentence, you got a fabricator dedicated a wild ass to blotting out the name of Yah as his God. They died inquiring and despairing.
Wow.
And then you have
that is amazing.
That's crazy. And then you have Lamech's 4 children, Jubal, Jabal, Naamah, and Tubal-Cain. And that comes out to he will be carried a stream, pleasantness will be brought of Cain. So it's almost like hope. Lamech is going, okay, we're going to start over here. And but obviously that doesn't really happen. So, wow. I mean, there's an interesting little sentence that comes out of the meaning of these names.
Most certainly.
Part of my thesis in the Archon Invasion book regarding the children of Ham was making the case that his offspring were Nephilim. I mean, their names come out to like enclosure of wrath and like terror and like these horrible names. Like, why would you name these kids that unless there's something clearly obviously wrong with these kids?
Right.
So obviously there's something going on there, and it looks like there's obviously something going on here when you get even just down to his 3rd child. He says, blot out that Yah is my God. So we'll go to break.
Absolutely. Wow. That's
And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba, for the final half-hour segment of the broadcast. I'm talking with my guest, Zen Garcia. We're discussing some of the plot lines and themes of his latest book, The Great Contest 2, Enmity Between the Seedlines. And right before the break, we were discussing the meaning of names, and specifically the sentence that you get when you look at the meaning of the names of Cain and his offspring. Rather interesting. We're talking about in Jude, where it says that Enoch of the good Enoch, there's 2 Enochs, the line of Seth was 7th from Adam, but that doesn't make any sense. If we consider Cain to be a son of Adam, then Enoch would be 8th from Adam, not 7th. So, and other interesting things, certainly worth considering. Now, okay, then this goes to whatever took place in the garden. We have 2 trees. We have the tree of life, which has fruit that we are going to be able to eat from at some point. And then you have this other tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which also had fruit on it. So if we were to take fruit as literal stuff hanging from branches on the tree of life, why would we not do the same thing for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil?
Oh, I actually do, and I interpret it that way because what happens if you read the passages which lead to what occurred there, it speaks about that And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of both of them were open, and they knew that they were naked. In my opinion, what is happening there is that they literally did take a fruit from this tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that when they did so, that's when they were transformed into flesh. That's also when their genitalia appeared, and that's when she was beguiled by the serpent and impregnated with Cain. And then Adam eating the fruit also, it says that is where Abel came about. So his repeating the act with her, and he did eat, is where Abel came about, which we know that it only makes sense that the crime fits the punishment. And so when it says, and the eyes of them were both open, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. They covered their genitals, and then they hid in shame away from the Lord God. He comes to them and asks them, why are they hiding, and who told you that you were naked? And then immediately, you have to look at the consequences as well. Them eating that fruit. And I'll share another passage here in just a short bit where it actually references that when they touched that tree, that's what happened. Their bodies were transformed into flesh. They lost their bright natures, their genitals appeared, and that's when Eve was seduced and impregnated. And so the Lord God tells them, and the Lord God said unto the woman, what is it that thou hast done? And the woman said, the serpent beguiled me, and I did eat. The Lord God said unto the serpent, because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle, above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman. In the Targum it says, between thee and the woman, and between thy sons and her sons. It says, even in the King James, it says, between thy seed and her seed. When you look up that word for seed, it's zera in the Hebrew. It means children, progeny, descendants. And then when you look at the consequences which were actually levied against Eve, verse 16, unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. Conception is birthing children, bringing forth children, conceiving children. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. So he's talking to her about being pregnant, that she's going to have to, because of her eating this fruit, she's going to give birth to children, and that also the blooming of sexuality will occur in them because they are going to be transformed into flesh form. He says to Adam, and unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it, cursed is the ground for thy sake, and sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of his life. When they were in paradise, the fruit trees in paradise gave their edible fruits freely. And it even speaks about the tree of life as having a different fruit for every month of the calendar year. But now that they were being cast out of paradise, placed on the earth, and now that they were in flesh bodies, he would actually have to work the ground in order to bring forth sustenance to feed his children, because now he would have progeny. Eve would give birth to children. And so why and how can an apple, if she ate an apple or a fig or a pomegranate, and there's no sexual connotations associated to the fruit, why does the Lord God curse her with childbirth, and curse the serpent with putting enmity between thy seed and her seed? How does he have a seed and she have a seed if Cain is not his child? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness to this argument, it never did make sense. Even though, okay, you're convincing, or at least doing a good job of trying to convince me, and making a very compelling case, in my opinion, for your thesis. Even when I was hardcore against this, the idea that they ate fruit and all of a sudden their reproductive lives are being judged because of it never really made sense to me. And immediately you have this prophecy about seed issues, as in offspring issues. Right. It's like, okay, I mean, why? I mean, if it's just about eating the fruit and nothing else took place there, why were those specific things addressed and cursed, if you will? Right. I mean, that's always, I'm like, it's kind of weird. So, okay, but you do believe that they ate from physical fruit from a tree branch.
Yes.
And I agree with that they lost their light suits, basically, that they were luminous beings, that they lost that. And again, Doug Hamp was the first to explain that in a way that really made a lot of sense to me. That, all of a sudden they losing that light suit and all of a sudden seeing their flesh, and they're like, hey, we're naked. I mean, that doesn't make sense any other way, really, unless something radically changed and they look down and say, whoa, hey, what's the deal here? So I'm in agreement with that. But as a result of taking that, carnality, if you will, entered their minds. And so in your scenario, then all of a sudden Eve wants to have sex.
I'll read a couple of verses. Well, it's not that she wanted to have sex. It's that the serpent wanted to have sex with her. She didn't know anything about sex. It would be the same as a pedophile. Raped. Like basically a 30-year-old pedophile looking at a 12-year-old or 14-year-old girl who knows nothing about sex. But, maybe in not that she wanted or even knew what was happening to her, but maybe the sensations felt intriguing to her and she went with it, and that she ended up getting pregnant. But I'll read two passages real quick, and then you can kind of you'll see the reference from them. It says this: then they both ate of that tree, and so their private parts appeared to them, and they began to stick on themselves the leaves from paradise for their covering. Thus did Adam disobey his Lord, so he went astray. Then his Lord chose him and turned to him with forgiveness and gave him guidance. Now, this passage is from the first book of Adam and Eve, and it will speak about the transformation of their flesh form. It says, and the Lord said to Adam and Eve, you transgressed of your own free will until you came out of the garden in which I had placed you. Of your own free will have you transgressed through your desire for divinity, greatness, and an exalted state, such as I have, so that I deprived you of the bright nature in which you then were. And I made you come out of the garden to this land rough and full of trouble. If only you had not transgressed my commandment and had kept my law and had not eaten of the fruit of the tree which I told you not to come near. And there were fruit trees in the garden better than that one. But the wicked Satan did not keep his faith and had no good intent towards me, that although I had created him, he considered me to be useless and sought the Godhead for himself. For this I hurled him down from heaven, so that he could not remain in his first estate. It was he who made the tree appear pleasant in your eyes, until you ate of it by believing his words. Thus have you transgressed my commandment, and therefore I have brought on you all these sorrows. For I am God the Creator, who when I created my creatures did not intend to destroy them. But after they had sorely roused my anger, I punished them with grievous plagues until they repent. But if on the contrary they still continue hardened in their transgression, they shall be under a curse forever. Now, the rest of the first book of Adam and Eve, if you study, you'll see how their bodies were transformed. Like, for instance, here's a short passage. But Adam and Eve cried for having come out of the garden, their first home. And indeed, when Adam looked at his flesh that was altered, he cried bitterly, he and Eve, over what they had done. And they walked and went gently down into the cave of treasures. And as they came to it, Adam cried over himself and said to Eve, "Look at this cave that is to be our prison in this world and a place of punishment. What is it compared with the garden? What is its narrowness compared with the space of the other? What is this rock by the side of those groves? What is the gloom of this cavern compared with the light of the garden? What is this overhanging ledge, this earth strewed with stones, and that planted with delicious fruit trees?" And Adam said to Eve, "Look at your eyes and mine, which before beheld angels praising in heaven, and they too without ceasing. But now we do not see as we did. Our eyes have become of flesh. They cannot see like they used to see before." And Adam said again to Eve, "What is our body today compared to what it was in former days when we lived in the garden?" After this, Adam did not want to enter the cave of treasures or the overhanging rock, nor would he ever want to enter it, but he bowed to God's orders and said to himself, "Unless I enter the cave of treasures, I shall again be a transgressor." It goes through great detail about how they didn't even understand how to walk, that I guess, in our glorified state, we project our wills and move without walking. Like we do in dreams, and also they didn't understand eating, drinking. They didn't understand the experience of darkness or the experience of daylight from the sun. They thought the sun was a monster that had come to eat them. And so all these things show that, they were transformed from a bright nature, from being clothed in a light vesture to being in flesh form, which made her, again, susceptible to being impregnated by the serpent.
So in Enoch, when it describes the 200 Watcher class angels that come down on Mount Hermon in the days of Jared and mate with women, and the Kabr Nagast, I believe, and perhaps other texts specifically state that the women that they came to were the daughters of Cain. Yeah. Which kind of makes sense then, if it's sort of a hybrid, if you will, pardon the pun, of the Sethite theory, taking the Sethite part out. The Sethite theory says the good sons of Seth mated with the bad daughters of Cain. Instead of the good sons of Seth, you have the formerly good Watcher class angels coming down to the daughters of Cain, who I guess would have had a similar nature, if what you're saying is true.
Yes, they were already hybrid.
They were already, at least, I guess. Yeah. But those Watcher class angels that did that received an extremely harsh and very severe judgment for the act of copulating with women. Why then if Satan did the same thing and he was the first to do it, why didn't he get bound in chains and put into Tartarus?
Well, this all goes back to the prophecy of what Christ speaks about in Matthew 13. Let me pull that up. Because it talks about in this particular verse that both would be allowed to grow together to the time of the end. And then you have to understand that the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent would play out for the entire history of this current world age. And it would be ongoing until Yeshua comes for the second advent. So I'll read the parable of the sower. It says this, verse 24 of Matthew 13. The parable of the kingdom, actually. "Another parable he put forth unto them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat." Remember, the enemy is the wicked one in the explanation of the tares of the field. And he names the wicked one, specifically the devil. I'll get to that in a second. But he says, "And sowed tares amongst the wheat, and went his way. But when the blade was sprung up," meaning the children born, "and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. So the servants of the householder came and said unto him, Sir, didst not thou sow good seed in thy field? From whence then hath it tares? He said unto them, An enemy hath done this. The servant said unto him, Wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? But he said, Nay, lest while ye gather up the tares, ye root up also the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And in the time of the harvest I will say to the reapers, Gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. Now, the other thing that is different with the watcher angels, and I'll go into that next, is that they were specifically told right before they left the heaven, left their place of habitation, and went down and mated with the daughters of Cain, not to involve themselves in that way. But they broke his commandment, immediately right after, which is why Yeshua brought forth wrath upon them. I'll read this, and then I'll read that passage from the Keber Nagas. Then Jesus, when he sent the multitude away, he went into the house, and his disciples came unto him, saying, Declare unto us the parable of the tares of the field. They didn't understand. What are you talking about with the parable of the field? He answered and said to them, that this is a direct explanation, because he always gives explanation to his apostles. He that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. 1 John chapter 3. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of this world. The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and they shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Who hath ears to hear, let him hear. And then one last thing as far as this Matthew 13, he goes into it again in verse 47, speaking about the kingdom of heaven. He says, just to reiterate so that they will understand, again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a net that was cast into the sea and gathered of every kind, which when it was full they drew to shore and sat down and gathered the good into vessels, but cast the bad away. So shall it be at the end of the world. The angels shall come forth and sever the wicked from among the just, and shall cast them into the furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Jesus saith unto them, Have ye understood all these things? They said unto him, Yea, Lord. So he made sure that they understood that what he was referencing, what he was speaking about, was connected to the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, because that's where the tares, the enemy, sowed them. The enemy which sowed them was the devil. And so that's why you have this battle taking place, even with the differences between Ishmael and Isaac, Jacob and Esau, David and Goliath, the Pharisees and Christ, why he said, Ye are of your father the devil, and he ascribes to them every murder of the prophets, going back to Abel, which Cain was the murderer of Abel. So we know that he's connecting the Pharisees to the line of Cain. And so, again, John chapter 8, all of that. But I'll read really quick. This is to clarify what happened to the watchers. It says, And they were content to leave the height of heaven, and they came down to earth to the folly of the dancing of the children of Cain, with all their work of the artisan, which they had made in the folly of their fornication, and to their singings which they accompanied with the tambourine and the flutes, and the pipes, and much shouting and loud cries of joy and noisy songs. And their daughters were there, and they enjoyed the orgies without shame, for they scented themselves for the men who pleased them, and they lost the balance in their minds. And the men did not restrain themselves for a moment, but they took to wife from among the women those whom they had chosen, and committed sin with them. And straightway God was wroth with them, and he bound them in the terror of Sheol until the day of redemption. The word of God conquered, who had fashioned Adam in his likeness, and those who had reviled and made a laughingstock of Adam were conquered. And the daughters of Cain, with whom the angels had companied, conceived, but they were unable to bring forth their children. And they died, and of the children who were in their wombs, some died and some came forth, having split open the bellies of their mothers, they came forth by their navels. And when they were grown up and reached man's estate, they became giants, whose height reached unto the clouds. I know that you probably want to comment, so I won't read the next one. But I have two other verses which also confirm this from the Perky Rabbi Eliezer and also from the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs from Reuben.
Well, yeah, we got 4 minutes left in the broadcast, so
Yeah.
anything else I would bring up right now would unpack a can of worms that we don't have time to talk about. Maybe we'll have to do another show on it. But in the meantime, for anybody who is interested in going deeper into this topic, it's like anything else. Condemnation before investigation is the height of ignorance. So
Exactly.
it's one thing to hear something and immediately dismiss it, and that's crazy, that's stupid. It's another to actually hear the whole matter, as Paul said, or as Solomon says. You got to hear the whole matter first, right, and then decide. And that's what I'm attempting to do right now. Is listen. I've got Zen's book, and if anybody else is interested in hearing the whole argument, where can people get your books? And again, what's the title of the book?
This particular book is the Great Contest, Book 2. The Enmity Between the Seedlines. The ones that we were talking about with the War in Heaven, that's the Great Contest, Book 1, the War in Heaven. You can contact me at zengarcia2010@gmail.com. My books are found on Lulu, Barnes & Noble, Amazon.com. If you're interested in any of my books and you want me to bundle them together for you at a discount, I also autograph them free of charge. Just contact me at my email address or hit me up on Facebook, Zen Garcia.
Now, have you read, the other side of it, the flip side of it, Dante Fortson has a book, Seedlines Debunked or something like that. Have you read his book?
I have, and I would have anybody out there that really wants to read and study into this topic to read both his book and my book and then make up your own mind.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'm all about. That's what I'm trying to advocate here. That people do study to show yourself approved. Study the scriptures for yourself. Look at these other texts if you want to. Two arguments that are presented. 119 Ministries also did a video on this, I believe, a while back that people might want to check out. But you got to hear both sides of the story.
Absolutely.
Dante's book is called The Serpent-seed Debunked. So if you want to check out his book, as Zen said, read that book and read Zen's book, and maybe it'd be kind of cool to, maybe to see if I get both of you guys on at the same time and have a friendly debate on it. That might be fun.
Sure.
I'm not trying to set you up or anything like that.
No, I've done the research and I studied everything. I study with. And before I ever come out in stance on the topic, same thing with the flat earth. I ask people to study this topic in the same manner that you would the flat earth. And then after having done the research that I have, then make your decision on whether it's true or not. But it's my opinion that if you open yourself to the possibility, it only makes sense when you interpret it in this way. And I invite anybody to, if they think I'm wrong in conclusion, make video, go chapter by chapter, verse by verse, the way that I do, and tell me where I'm wrong and where I'm interpreting this wrong. Because in my mind, eating an apple in no way could lead to her conceiving children and there being enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. That can only be interpreted as an act of sexual lust and intercourse, which again led to the curses levied against them.
All right, there you go. Hey Zen, thanks so much for coming on tonight.
My pleasure, brother. Hey, I applaud you for opening yourself to the possibilities of it.
Thank you, and thank you guys for listening to the Revolutionary Radio Project. We'll see you back next week, 11 p.m. Central Standard Time. Good night, everybody.
God bless all. Shalom.
All right, and that concludes the interview that I had with Zen Garcia on March 15th, 2017. Today is March 20th, and I wanted to get this up on YouTube as quickly as I could, and I'll tell you why in a few minutes. Before I do that, though, somebody had sent me a video to check out that was an interview that Josh Peck did with Timothy Alberino, actually almost exactly a year ago. It was recorded on March 13th, 2016. And wow, certainly the beginning of it, there's quite a few things that I would disagree with, especially regarding Flat Earth. But I got to say, about an hour and a half into the interview, they started going down the same path that Zen and I just discussed, the whole idea of the serpent seed issue. And I'm going to play a clip for you from that interview. Now, let me just say, I've had Josh on my show a few times, and I've been on his show before as well. He's somebody that I respect and consider to be a friend. Timothy Alberino, I have never had any interaction with him. However, the few videos of his that I have seen, I really enjoyed. He's done some really good work with Steve Quayle and the Giants, True Legends, really good video. Highly recommend that you check out his work. When it came to his take on what could have happened in the garden, I just gotta say I found it really compelling. So, like what was said in the interview with Zen, we're just putting this out there for your consideration so that you can weigh both sides of the debate and have as much information as possible when doing so. So here's about a 20-minute clip from the interview that Josh did. The whole interview is almost 3 hours long, so if you want to check that out, I'll put the link in the show notes to the video on Josh Peck's YouTube channel so you can watch the rest of it. All right, so here's the clip.
Now, I think that Cain, when he was banished from the family line, he didn't take a relative of his, a daughter of Adam. He went and engaged and, for lack of a better term, had intercourse with something that was not a part of that family line.
Mm-hmm.
But before Cain ever went away, I think there was something already mysterious, suspicious, let's say, about Cain himself. And I think it's, I think we're given a clue later on in the story that I think mirrors the story of Cain and Abel later on, which is the story of Jacob and Esau.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you look at Jacob, and this is a very long-winded answer, when you look at Jacob and Esau, those were twins for sure, right?
Yeah.
Jacob the usurper holding on to the heel of Esau, right?
Right.
But it wasn't Jacob who was the usurper, it was Esau.
Mm.
Because here you have twins. One of them, just a normal-looking guy. Hey, you know what? I'm a twin, Josh. So
yeah?
I got a little bit of perspective on this.
Oh, cool.
One of these twins is just a normal-looking guy, Jacob.
Mm-hmm.
But then you got Esau, who's red and hairy.
Yeah.
So hairy, in fact, that his father, who wasn't an idiot, could be deceived by the skin of a young goat, the fur of a young goat.
Yeah. That's a lot of hair.
So Jacob's mother ties the fur of a young goat on Jacob's forearm so that Jacob's father would touch it and think it was Esau.
Yeah.
Now, either he was a retard, excuse me for the phrase, or there was something very convincing about the hair of an animal in relationship to his son Esau. There was something not only convincing, that was in fact the trademark of his son Esau. Something so unique and different to Esau that his mother, Jacob's mother, thought, if we tie around your forearm this fur, this animal skin, then your father will think that you're your brother.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. They're twins. They're twins. Jacob and Esau are twins. Who's usurping what here?
Yeah.
See? Jacob was the one who the birthright belonged to, and I'll tell you why. Because he was human.
Wow.
Esau was the usurper. He wasn't fully human. I'm sorry. He wasn't fully human. I think the Bible is telling us, it's hinting to us, this is a red, furry guy. who goes off, by the way, and marries a Nephilim to spite his parents.
Right.
After the incident, he got ticked off after Jacob tricked him out of the birthright. What does he do? He goes off and marries a couple, Rephaim or whatever the tribe was, their Nephilim tribe, to spite his parents. So, who became great irritations to Jacob and I'm sorry, I forgot who Jacob's father was. Anyways, Isaac, that's right. So he became very these Nephilim women who Esau married became irritating. They were very irritating to Isaac. So obviously there's something going on here. And the reason why I bring that up is because Esau was the usurper, not Jacob. Jacob was called the usurper because he was holding on to the heel. But that birthright only belongs to humans, not to hybrids. So here's a question, Josh. If I'm right, and Esau was a hybrid, how did that happen?
Yeah. Do you think that was something left over from... Wow, I don't know. What?
There's three options in my mind. Either A, it was something left over in the gene pool. B, twinning, the scenario of twinning, two different fathers. Or C, some kind of an abduction scenario.
Oh, wow.
And that will sound crazy to people, but I don't care. They're twins, but one of them's a hairy animal, hairy red animal. I'm sorry. That's called genetics. I'm an identical twin with my brother. He doesn't look like an ape.
Right.
He's not hairy he's not a red hairy ape. He pretty much looks like me. Why? Because we're twins. We share many of the same genetic trademarks. That's the nature of a twin. If you have two twins that are vastly different, it's because there's an extra element in there. There's extra genetic information in one of them. Or there's differing genetic material between the two of them. In other words, one of them has a different father.
Wow.
Now, that could have been the case with Cain and Abel. Could have been a twinning scenario. I want people, and of course this is very, very controversial, and I'm not saying I subscribe to this 100%. I'm just floating the idea out there.
Yeah. So
with Cain, with what happened with Cain, we go back to the Garden of Eden. We look at what happened with Eve and the serpent, and I say there's more to that meets the eye. Why? Because I think that the judgment fits the crime. I think that the sentencing from the Father, from the great judge, had to do with the act that was committed, the crime. And if you look at the sentencing, the judgment against Eve and against the serpent, you'll notice that they're reproductive in nature. Eve will have pain in childbirth, in childbearing, and women in general, the daughters of Eve, because of what happened, are going to have pain when bringing forth offspring into this world. It's going to be a painful thing now. That's a judgment. When women are in labor, screaming and crying and slapping their husbands, that's because of what Eve did in the garden. It's not natural to the human race to have pain and childbirth. It was never intended. It's because of sin, specifically because of the sin that took place in the garden. Now, that's reproductive in nature, that judgment. It's sexual. It's sort of a judgment that's relative to some sort of a sexual crime. It's reproductive in nature. But that's not all. Her seed would have conflict with the seed of the serpent.
Right.
So again, here's a judgment that is relational to offspring, which is reproductive in nature. the judgment is reproductive in nature. It's concerning the act of reproduction and of offspring. Your seed will be in conflict, will have enmity with the seed of the serpent, which is a judgment also on the seed of the serpent. So, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, I should say apparently, at least possibly, there seems to have been something sexual involved in what took place in the Garden of Eden. Furthermore, and again, that's very controversial. Furthermore, the response of Adam and Eve after their sin was to do what? To put fig leaves on their noses, right? Put them on their ears or on their eyes or on their hands. No. They covered their sexual organs.
Yeah.
Didn't they?
Yeah.
They sewed for themselves girdles to cover up what? Their reproductive faculties.
Wow.
Why were they doing that? Because in my opinion, it's those members of their bodies that had caused them shame. So they were covering up that which had caused them shame, that which that had defiled them, not their mouths for eating an apple or whatever.
Right.
Of course, it wasn't an apple. If anything, it was grapes, but I don't know. So here they are, covering up their reproductive organs with girdles that they sewed together because they were ashamed of something that they had done. And a judgment is coming down that is reproductive in nature. I put two and two together, and I find a plausible explanation in a sexual act that might have taken place in the Garden of Eden. Might have. Let me stress that word, might have. I'm not sold out to the idea, but it's something to consider for people who want to consider all the possibilities when looking at the Garden of Eden. So, if that's true, if that scenario I just laid out was true, then you could have had what is called twinning, which is a natural phenomenon that happens sometimes where, and I don't mean to be graphic, but if a woman engages in sexual intercourse with two males within a certain period of time, she can give birth to twins from two different fathers. It happens even today. It's rare, but it happens. If that happened with Cain and Abel, then it would indicate that Cain was of a different father than Abel. And would then implicate the line of Cain in some sort of a hybrid scenario, even before the fall of the Watchers. Now, when the Watchers fell, who did they interact with immediately? The line of Cain. We know that through extra biblical texts. It was Tubal-Cain, who was the great smith, and it was the Watchers who brought the technology of smithing and of weapons forging and so forth to the human race. They were very intimately involved with the line of Cain. The line of Cain was definitely predisposed to receive the teaching of the Watchers. Remember, Enoch was teaching too.
Yeah.
So who was Enoch teaching? Well, the line of Seth. So Enoch was teaching the righteous, the line of Seth, and then, of course, the line of Cain was involved with the Watchers. So that's a very complicated situation. So I think you had a genetic mess before the Watchers even got into the picture.
Wow.
Then you add the Watchers into the picture, and now you've got genetic chaos.
Yeah, they certainly didn't help.
Yeah, they came and they made a real mess of things. But I think there was something going on with the line of Cain. Now, I have a little theory I haven't been able to substantiate. But I think that the elongated skulls, the Homo capensis, this genetically different race of human-like entities that we find all over the place, their skulls at least, which are, of course, documented in we know that they're all over the world. The depictions of the Egyptians with the the royal lineage having the elongated skulls, and I think that that elongated skull race
Mm-hmm.
might be from the line of Cain.
Oh, wow.
And I'm talking pre-Watcher line of Cain. That could have been a genetic trait that was intrinsic, innate in the line of Cain
Mm-hmm.
before the Watchers ever came. That's just a theory of mine. I don't know if it's true. I don't have much proof to substantiate it. But I'll toss it out there for people who are interested in that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Have you? Because this is something I've thought about as well, and I've wondered if this scenario is true, why the and maybe you thought about it longer than I have, or might have a theory on it. Why the judgment for the serpent in the garden, if there was a sexual thing that happened there, the judgment for the serpent in the garden is different than for the Watchers. The Watchers were, bound in the bottomless pit and everything, but the serpent, the judgment was, I don't have the text right in front of me, but you'll crawl on your belly, and eat dust, and yeah, all that stuff. What do you make of that?
Well, I have a rather radical view concerning that. I obviously don't believe that it was a snake.
Right, same here.
That had legs, that was judged, and suddenly his legs went away, and now he had to slither around.
Same here.
I don't think that makes any sense. It's illogical.
Mm-hmm.
It's irrational. Consider what it means to eat dust. Consider what it means to crawl on your belly. I have another theory that, again, it's just a theory,
Mm-hmm.
that when it talks about the serpent having to crawl on his belly and eat dust, I have a feeling it might be referring to a class of entities that would be bound to have to live under the ground.
Oh, okay.
That they would be constrained to life beneath the surface of the earth. That they would eat dust. They would be beneath the feet of men. And that opens up a whole can of worms.
Well, it's interesting, and that actually makes sense, because if the judgment on Eve was for Eve and all the women after that,
that's right,
it would make sense that the judgment on the serpent would be for the serpent
that's
and
right.
then any other of its kind.
That's right. So, its kind is the key word. So, what was the serpent? Well, we know the devil was involved,
mm-hmm.
for sure. Satan, because the book of Revelations tells us the dragon, that serpent of old,
mm-hmm.
right? So we know the dragon was involved. That serpent of old. When it says a serpent of old, of course, it's referencing the serpent.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the serpent, the snake, is a symbol of the devil, because of the Garden of Eden, and probably because he probably has some adder-like attributes.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, there's nothing wrong with a snake.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing intrinsically wrong with a serpent. So we look at a serpent as being unlovely because of the Garden of Eden, right?
Right.
We have a natural aversion to a snake because of the Garden of Eden.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of ingrained in us because we're children of Adam and Eve. We're the offspring. And it was this situation with the serpent in the garden that caused us to be bound to this terrible condition of sin and death, mm-hmm. which the cross rectifies. So, when we think about it in those terms, all right, so the devil is implicated with the serpent, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
That's serpent of old, the devil. But does that mean that the serpent was the devil himself? Or does that mean that the serpent was another entity that was influenced or perhaps even possessed by the devil?
Oh, wow.
I don't know. Was it the devil himself? Or was it an entity influenced or possessed by the devil?
Right.
I don't know. But if it wasn't the devil himself, if it was an entity, let's call it a serpentine entity,
mm-hmm.
sentient, that was influenced by the devil or inhabited by the devil. Remember, we know that this is not something that is uncommon to the devil. Remember, the devil used Peter, the apostle, to try and divert the plan of the Father for Jesus to go to the cross. When Jesus spoke of his death, Peter basically said, this can't be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what did Jesus say to him? He looked at Peter and he addressed the devil.
Yeah.
Who was working through Peter. So, which is very interesting. It's very telling the way that the devil operates.
Yeah.
He was using Peter to try and dissuade Christ, which tells us a lot about the devil, that he had some sort of knowledge of what Christ was about to do because he was trying to dissuade him from doing it, that the Son of Man must die, right?
Yep.
And so here's the devil using Peter to tell him, no, you shouldn't do that. You don't have to do that. And Jesus instantly recognizes it as Satan and rebukes him, looking at Peter rebuking the devil. So that in and of itself provides us with context of how it might have been in the Garden of Eden with another entity that wasn't necessarily the devil himself, but an entity perhaps possessed, definitely influenced, at the very least, by the devil. Is it possible that this entity, this serpentine entity, was somehow offspring of the devil? I don't know. Does the possibility exist? I would say it at least exists. Might be remote, but at least exists. It exists. So, if we're dealing with an entity that was not the devil himself, but that was an entity either possessed, influenced, or the offspring of the devil, then we might be dealing with a whole class of sentient beings that were constrained to live in the caverns of the earth beneath our feet.
Wow.
Serpentine entities that were pre-Adamic that have to live in the caverns of the earth or have to live beneath our feet and eat dust, in other words. Be constrained to crawl on their bellies, which might very well be a metaphor. All of these things might be a metaphor for they're underneath the earth.
Right.
They're in the caverns of the earth. The whole hollow earth situation. It's plausible.
Yeah.
And it certainly would explain a lot of different encounters that people have with these kinds of serpentine entities, especially under the ground.
And there you go. I'll stop it there. Really compelling, at least to me anyway. I think so. This is a subject that, like I said in the interview with Zen, I'm not completely sold on it. In fact, I've been very much against this whole idea for a long time. I thought I had a really slam dunk case against it, especially with Genesis 4:1. But now I got to be honest with you. After the interview with Zen, after looking at this interview, and I've done a fair amount of research since last Wednesday on my own, I'm not quite as confident as I was before in all of this. But there's another individual who is very confident and who is very much against this whole idea, and that person is Dante Fortson. And we mentioned him in the interview that I did with Zen, and he's written a book, The Serpent-seed Debunked. And like Zen said, he said, look, read this book, please. Go get Dante's book and read it first, as a matter of fact, and then get Zen's book and read his book and compare. Solomon said, he that answers the matter before he hears it, it's folly to him. And we've, of course, talked about condemnation before investigation as the height of ignorance. So, there's some really good and very compelling arguments on both sides, but you got to hear both sides before you can make a decision. I'm still weighing the merits of both sides myself. And in the interview that I did with Zen, I was kind of joking. I said, hey, it'd be cool to get you guys together and have a debate about it. And I was sort of joking about it, but then after I finished the interview, I started thinking about it, especially the next day, and I thought, you know what, it would be cool to get these two together and have a debate. So I contacted them individually on Facebook and asked if they would be open to it, and both people agreed. And so I'm real excited to host a debate for the first time, and it'll be between Zen Garcia and Dante Fortson. It'll be called the Battle of the Seedlines Debate, and it will air this coming Wednesday, March 22nd, 2017, from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Central Standard Time here on the Revolutionary Radio Project. Hope you can join us. I'm thinking it's going to be a pretty powerful, information-packed show, so you're not going to want to miss it. See you then. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video presentation. If you did, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, like the video, and share it on your favorite social media sites. There's a lot more to come, so stay tuned and we'll see you back next time.